Just minutes earlier, Meghan Markle collapsed to the floor stunned, breathless, and barely able to speak as cameras rolled, aides shouted, and the palace snapped into full lockdown. This was not merely a health scare, but the moment everything unraveled, triggered by a DNA test that shattered everything Meghan believed about her daughter, Lilibet Diana. The incident began at an exclusive Los Angeles charity gala, an event Meghan was accustomed to, where she stood mid-speech in a deep emerald green gown when her phone buzzed once, then again, then a third time. Something shifted in her expression as she glanced at the screen. Her hands began to tremble, her voice faltered, and a chill swept across her face. What followed was captured only in fragments grainy security footage, the shocked gasps of guests, and the dull thud of her knees against the marble floor as she collapsed, breath coming in staggered bursts, pupils wide, lips moving without sound. Paramedics were called, but Meghan refused to go to the hospital, repeating through a shaken but unmistakable voice, "I need to get to Harry," as she clutched an aide's arm and forced herself upright, her eyes wild with disbelief, as if something inside her had cracked. Within minutes, paparazzi swarmed the scene, news vans lined the streets, helicopters circled overhead, and online speculation exploded. Was it a panic attack, a confrontation, something else entirely? The truth, however, was far more devastating. Just minutes earlier, Meghan Markle collapsed to the floor stunned, breathless, and barely able to speak as cameras rolled, aides shouted, and the palace snapped into full lockdown. This was not merely a health scare, but the moment everything unraveled, triggered by a DNA test that shattered everything Meghan believed about her daughter, Lilibet Diana. The incident began at an exclusive Los Angeles charity gala, an event Meghan was accustomed to, where she stood mid-speech in a deep emerald green gown when her phone buzzed once, then again, then a third time. Something shifted in her expression as she glanced at the screen. Her hands began to tremble, her voice faltered, and a chill swept across her face. What followed was captured only in fragments grainy security footage, the shocked gasps of guests, and the dull thud of her knees against the marble floor as she collapsed, breath coming in staggered bursts, pupils wide, lips moving without sound. Paramedics were called, but Meghan refused to go to the hospital, repeating through a shaken but unmistakable voice, "I need to get to Harry," as she clutched an aide's arm and forced herself upright, her eyes wild with disbelief, as if something inside her had cracked. Within minutes, paparazzi swarmed the scene, news vans lined the streets, helicopters circled overhead, and online speculation exploded. Was it a panic attack, a confrontation, something else entirely? The truth, however, was far more devastating. But what exactly was this discrepancy, and why did it ignite a war between Harry and the crown? For more than 1,000 years, royal blood had been treated as sacred. Yet this DNA test did more than question paternity, it threatened the very definition of royalty itself, thrusting Lilibet Diana into the center of a constitutional firestorm and leaving Meghan cast as either villain or victim. The report did not merely hint at irregularities. It declared absence, noting that specific genetic markers historically associated with the Windsor bloodline were missing in ways too stark to ignore. Scientific terminology filled the margins, but the conclusion was unmistakable. The child did not possess what had long been deemed essential, not in hair composition, not in mitochondrial patterns, not even in deeper recessive markers traced back to the Georgian era, making the findings not just unusual, but unprecedented. Within hours of the results reaching the upper ranks of the Royal Legal Council, tense, whispered discussions began behind triple-locked doors as constitutional advisors, some long dormant, were summoned, ultimately placing Lilibet Diana's position in the line of succession under review, a phrase that echoed through the palace like a gunshot. This was no longer about love or family. It was about legitimacy, and for the monarchy, survival. Soon after, a single explosive message surfaced in the hands of a journalist, known for exposing stories the palace preferred buried, allegedly sent from an encrypted device linked to King Charles himself. Reading, "We cannot allow a pretender." Whether genuine or planted, its impact was immediate as headlines erupted, hashtags surged, and Meghan was transformed overnight from media exile into a full-blown pariah, accused not merely of personal scandal, but of national deception. Blindsided and furious, Meghan refused to remain silent, her voice cracking as she accused the crown of institutional sabotage and thinly veiled racial bias, insisting this was not science but a vendetta cloaked in genetics, and demanding to know who approved the test, who authorized the leak, and who dared question her daughter's identity. Harry, torn between the crushing weight of tradition and the raw emotion of his wife, began to unravel, demanding full disclosure from the Swiss lab chain of custody records, names, timestamps, proof, because for him this was no longer just betrayal, but surveillance, and it meant war. Buckingham Palace's response was swift and surgical. An emergency summit was convened under a chilling, redacted agenda known only by its code name Operation Legacy Purity, a plan not merely to contain the scandal, but to cleanse it entirely. Yet as the Crown scrambled for damage control, Meghan launched her own investigation and uncovered a betrayal far closer to home, forcing her to confront a devastating question. What if the man she trusted most had known the truth before she did? Believing she and Harry were united against the monarchy, she began to notice troubling signs: hidden emails, hushed meetings, and a mysterious envelope raising doubts about whether Harry was protecting the crown or himself. For Meghan, the true betrayal was not the test itself, but the silence. The way Harry's eyes flickered when she pressed for answers, the way he abruptly changed the subject whenever DNA was mentioned, explanations she initially dismissed as stress, pressure, or old trauma. But late one night, borrowing his laptop to look for an old photo of Lilibet, she discovered a folder buried beneath layers of encryption. Half guessing passwords and half praying she was wrong, she opened it and felt her knees buckle. Inside were clinical, detached emails exchanged with a London-based private intelligence firm known to employ MI6 agents, the earliest dated 6 weeks before Lilibet was born, bearing the subject line: preliminary arrangements, ancestral verification. Her breath caught as the truth set in: Harry had commissioned his own DNA test before the palace ever did, before their daughter had even taken her first breath. Worse still, in the back of a drawer containing old letters and keepsakes from his mother, she found a cream-colored envelope, slightly torn, handwritten with the words "to H, only do not open" around her. Her hands trembled as she opened it to reveal a single, sterile page listing lab instructions, dates, and a chain of custody note confirming the sample had already been collected at Harry's personal request. When she confronted him, her voice raw with disbelief, she asked, "Is she even ours?" The words cutting the air like a blade. Harry stood silent at first, staring into nothing, before finally replying in a quiet, broken voice that he needed to know before they used it against them. Not for peace of mind or curiosity, but out of strategy and fear. Harry claimed he had withheld the truth from Meghan not because he didn't love her, but because he feared who might be listening, watching, or waiting to twist it into something monstrous. To Meghan, however, that distinction no longer mattered, because her world had already begun to fracture and was now crumbling completely. Everything they had built, the rebellion, the brand, the fight for independence, suddenly felt like a lie, as the image of Harry as her protector and partner in defiance became stained with doubt. Not because he had plotted against her, but because he had acted alone, in secret, in fear, and perhaps worst of all, in anticipation. Yet the real twist was not in who knew, but in who didn't, and who was about to weaponize the truth. Hours after Meghan's collapse, the DNA results appeared online in a hidden forum linked to a notorious royal blogger, raising the question of coincidence or a coordinated strike from deep within the royal machinery. What emerged pointed to a silent coup with Lilibet as the pawn. The leak was not accidental but timed, calculated, and deliberate, appearing just minutes after Buckingham Palace received final confirmation of the results. Clarence House had gone into silent lockdown, yet the exact document, complete with lab seal and authentication code, surfaced in a digital underworld frequented by royal obsessives and conspiracy hunters, uploaded in pristine, high-fidelity form as if released directly from the source itself. This was no rogue employee, it required access. 2 days earlier, a senior palace aide had been dismissed without warning, press notice, or stated cause. A woman known for loyalty, discretion, and for keeping secrets. No one dared write down her sudden departure, sending whispers through Clarence House, with some claiming she overheard a conversation she shouldn't have, others insisting she had proof. Soon after, both she and the results were gone. The blogger who broke the story vanished as well, shutting down his entire online presence within 6 hours of publishing. Last traced to Heathrow Terminal 5, with a one-way ticket to Dubai and a passport under a false name. Immigration footage showed him boarding, but no confirmed arrival on the other end. Some believed he was paid to disappear, others that he was forced. MI5 was notified and the breach classified as a potential internal threat to national stability, but the investigation stalled almost immediately as palace advisors invoked the long-standing shield of royal family immunity, effectively paralyzing any serious attempt at interrogation. With no subpoenas, no warrants, and no arrests, there was only silence, and in that silence, speculation flourished. A recovered email thread soon pointed to a familiar yet controversial figure. Prince Andrew's former fixer, once a ghost-like presence at royal events and now long withdrawn from public view, yet unmistakably embedded in the data trail through domain transfers, crypto wallets, and offshore hosting platforms. He had the motive, the means, and perhaps most damning of all, the network. This was never just about Meghan. It was about legacy, purity, and preservation. Lilibet represented a dangerous question mark in a lineage built on control, and by exposing her, they weren't merely humiliating Meghan. They were protecting the throne, stripping Harry of influence, and ensuring only one narrative endured. As the media frenzy erupted, public opinion shifted, though not as the palace had anticipated. She's just a child, many said, yet in the brutal court of public opinion, Lilibet became a symbol of doubt, deception, and divided loyalties. Protesters gathered outside Montecito, royal loyalists branded her a fraud, and the darkest threats emerged from those vowing to cleanse the bloodline. What began as online whispers escalated into something far more dangerous as the hashtag #NotMyPrincess spread like wildfire, fueled by rage, fear, and centuries-old obsessions with royal purity. Lilibet, a toddler barely old enough to form full sentences, had become the face of a controversy so incendiary it ignited a divided nation, no longer seen as a victim, but branded by some as a threat. The narrative quickly hardened into the claim that the monarchy itself had been infiltrated from within, and tabloids seized the moment, splashing front pages with venom disguised as analysis, one headline screaming the crown's genetic shame, another declaring a royal lie birthed in California. Comment sections turned into digital battlegrounds as photos of Lilibet were dissected, criticized, and weaponized, with strangers debating her features like evidence in a public trial, her innocence not protecting her but making her an easier target. Meghan and Harry were forced to escalate security around their Montecito estate as gates were reinforced, private guards replaced part-time staff, motion sensors were upgraded, and even drones were intercepted flying low over the property to capture footage the press couldn't obtain on foot. Yet through it all, Meghan refused to hide, telling a shaken staff member with fierce resolve, "She's still my daughter, they don't get to decide what that means." The threats soon grew darker, as a private investigation traced several death threats to a shadowy online forum run by an ultra-royalist Windsor, cult and obscure but organized faction that treated the royal bloodline as sacred scripture, devoted to preserving purity and eliminating what they called contamination. They didn't want Meghan silenced. They wanted Lilibet erased, with one chilling message reading, "Cleanse the crown. Remove the false heir." These weren't trolls but fanatics, and Harry Long considered the more measured of the two finally cracked, reportedly, saying in a closed-door call intercepted by an insider, "We will burn the system down before they take her the palace," still keeping its distance publicly, began to fear what Harry might do next, not only as a father, but as a prince disillusioned beyond repair. Behind the panic, however, Meghan made a decision that stunned even her closest allies. She didn't cry or beg, she planned, and what she prepared to release next would turn the crown's accusation on its head, as a second DNA report commissioned in secret revealed a truth even darker than questions about Lilibet's genes. The royal bloodline itself was compromised. In the aftermath, as the palace tightened its grip and public sentiment spiraled into hysteria, Meghan remained silent, not broken or defeated, but calculating, because weeks before the first test ever surfaced, long before her collapse and Harry's unraveling, she had already set her countermove in motion. By the time Harry finally confessed, Meghan had already begun to sense the walls closing in and had quietly commissioned her own DNA analysis. Unlike the Crown's version conducted in Europe under layers of secrecy and monarchy-controlled silence, hers was carried out in Santa Barbara at a private medical research center with no ties to the Windsors, no access to the press, and no allegiance to the Crown. The results were everything she had hoped for and something she never expected. Not only did they confirm Lilibet's full biological connection to both Meghan and Harry, but they also uncovered a far more disturbing anomaly buried deep within the palace's own family tree. Using publicly available royal DNA samples from medical archives, Meghan's team identified glaring inconsistencies, genetic markers that did not align with the Windsor lineage, markers that should not have existed at all. Cross-referencing the genome pointed to someone else, someone high in the line of succession, carrying traits from outside the royal bloodline, raising the explosive possibility that the real deception had not begun with Meghan or Lilibet, but with the Queen's own maternal ancestry buried, rewritten in dusty ledgers, and cloaked in generations of silence. This was no mere rebuttal to the monarchy's narrative. It was an earthquake, and Meghan was finished playing defense. Her media team released a 30-second teaser featuring only her voice and a stark message. They told me to stay silent. I have proof they lied. The world froze, the press scrambled, and the palace spiraled as legal teams mobilized overnight, issuing furious warnings of international defamation proceedings if the full interview aired, but it was already too late, because Oprah had already said yes. A second exclusive interview was confirmed, global in reach, with no edits and no limits, and Oprah's simple words at the press conference made it clear. This was far from over. Yet as Meghan prepared for open war, another voice entered the arena, one capable of shaking the monarchy from within. Before her death, Princess Diana had written a private letter, sealed and hidden, entrusted to a confidant with strict instructions never to release it unless a child was threatened for being born into the wrong version of truth. Now, as Meghan's counterstrike rocked the foundations of the crown, a weathered envelope arrived quietly at a Montecito address, bearing no return label, but unmistakable authenticity. Inside was Diana's handwriting, preserved for more than 2 decades by her former therapist, and its contents were hauntingly prophetic, opening with a line that felt torn from scripture. One day, a child will come who carries more than our name. Diana did not write in specifics, but in instincts, and what she foresaw now linked directly to Meghan, Lilibet, and the centuries-old secrets of the House of Windsor. Diana wrote of a deep unease she felt near the end of her life, of secrets never spoken publicly, and of a bloodline she feared had been tampered with long before Meghan ever entered the picture. But one passage struck like lightning. They will fear her because her blood is not of Windsor, but greater than Windsor. Harry was handed the letter first and read it again and again before collapsing into a chair, sobbing, whispering that his mother had known all along, while Meghan stood frozen beneath the crushing weight of generations. Realizing Diana hadn't merely sensed a coming storm, she had left them a map to survive it. The public reaction was explosive as Meghan released verified excerpts of the letter, authenticated by handwriting analysts and royal historians, igniting a global firestorm with hashtag Princess Diana was right trending across more than 50 countries and candlelight vigils forming from Kensington Palace to Los Angeles, as many viewed this not just as revelation, but as retribution. Diana, silenced in life, now speaking through her son's daughter. The press turned inward, Parliament was forced to respond, and MPs demanded unprecedented royal succession transparency hearings. But for Meghan this was no longer about revenge, it was about legacy, truth, and ensuring Lilibet would never feel ashamed of her existence, her blood, or her name. Suddenly the question shifted from whether Lilibet belonged in the royal family to whether the royal family could survive without her, as new genetic data suggested she descended from a lineage older, more powerful, and more legitimate than the Windsors themselves. Meghan's private research team expanded its investigation beyond paternity to understand why Lilibet had been so violently rejected, uncovering genetic markers thought lost to time, traces of Plantagenet and Tudor bloodlines long believed fractured or erased through centuries of manipulated succession. Even more chilling was a match to an obscure anomaly buried in royal medical archives, an unaccounted-for embryo from a 1987 scandal never explained, now echoing through Lilibet's DNA, suggesting the convergence of 2 royal houses, once divided by war and marriage, a lineage older than Windsor and more legitimate than any heir currently seated. Historians began to whisper boldly that this was not an heir, but a reckoning the blood that once crowned kings and divided empires, now carried by a child the monarchy tried to exile, making Lilibet not a footnote in history, but its unresolved future. In her second interview with Oprah, Meghan delivered the final strike without tears or fury, saying only, "She is truth, and they fear her," words that became a global rallying cry as royalist factions fractured and a new movement rose young, unshackled, and defiant, seeing Lilibet not as a threat, but as a beginning, calling her the crownbreaker, a child born not to preserve the monarchy, but to correct it. The palace responded with silence, issuing only 6 words that burned into history: "The blood remembers." That is all. And as the monarchy trembled, one truth became undeniable: Lilibet was no longer a child in the shadows, but the storm they could no longer control.